Esta organización es el guardián regional en defensa de la democracia, la libertad y los derechos humanos. Los países se han comprometido con estos valores a través de instrumentos legales como la Carta Democrática Interamericana, la Convención Americana de Derechos Humanos y todas las demás convenciones interamericanas. Nuestro trabajo es mantener los más altos estándares. Debemos ser objetivos, analizar los hechos, denunciar cuando veamos corrupción, inequidad o amenazas a la libertad. En esos casos no podemos ser neutrales.
More than 100 years since the inauguration of this building, the OAS headquarters, our institution still brings together the peoples of the Americas to address our responsibilities as a partnership of nations. As we look to the future, our work must also focus on the construction of a positive agenda that continues to favorably impact millions of lives every day.
The COVID-19 pandemic brought unprecedented challenges to our member states and the people we serve. In response, the OAS Secretariat for Integral Development adopted a three-pronged approach by 1. Adjusting our portfolio of existing projects, 2. Exploring new projects to meet emerging needs, and 3. Expanding multi-sectoral partnerships. The results achieved in 2020 demonstrate the resilience of our member states and the commitment of the OAS SETI to work with member states and partners towards our common goals in the development of our region. Our Network on Competitiveness launched the COVID-19 Ideas Accelerator, sharing 250 tools, health solutions, responses, and recovery plans. The Network for Labor Administration published a portfolio of responses from ministries of labor to COVID-19, sharing over 420 measures taken to protect workers, employment, and income. Likewise, the Inter-American Teacher Education Network series, Teaching STEM in Quarantine, provided 117,000 teachers with key tools to continue advancing STEM education during the pandemic. Through its network and platforms, the Inter-American Committee on Ports promoted international and national best practices, guidelines, protocols, and recommendations on COVID-19 safety measures and continuity of logistic operations. Initiatives such as the Education in Times of Change platform allowed us to meet urgent needs by offering timely tools on virtual education and a dedicated space for ministries to share strategies, actions, and solutions. Other programs such as the Row Fund stepped up, providing emergency grants to offset the challenges imposed on our students by the pandemic. SETI's partnerships are adding value to member states in the form of technical assistance, training, and access to tools and services. In partnership with leading private sector institutions, we offered micro, small, and medium enterprises access to online tools and training, increasing their visibility and participation in e-commerce, a key to their survival and growth in the pandemic and post-pandemic era. A new OAS SETI Facebook initiative provided 85,000 MSMEs across the region with capacity building opportunities and WhatsApp business tools to aid response, recovery, and resilience building. The Caribbean Small Business Development Centers program achieved real impact, supporting new businesses, expanding sales, and driving growth. A new network of Caribbean SPDCs will broaden the program's reach. The Inter-American Committee on Tourism, the C2, convened ministerial-level policy dialogue in an urgent response to the impact of the pandemic on the hard-hit tourism and hospitality sectors. Policymakers and experts discussed biosanitary protocols, travel and visa facilitation, among other critical areas for the sector's recovery. Partnering with the George Washington University and the U.S. Bureau of Indian Affairs, we went ahead with the scheduled first Indigenous Tourism Forum of the Americas, pivoting to a virtual format and convening over 240 participants from indigenous communities, the private sector, and governments. SETI also integrated sustainable development practices in the COVID-19 response. The pandemic is a daily reminder of the links between water, health, sanitation, food security, and nutrition. We ensured the continuity of our water management projects in the Plata Basin and worked with governments and partners in the design of an investment portfolio valued at $90 million. Additionally, the Energy and Climate Partnership of the Americas continued to share relevant best practices and responses to the pandemic on energy and air quality. These few examples indicate our collective impact. We cannot do this alone. It is now more urgent than ever to address the region's structural weaknesses, to recover from the health, economic, and social crises occasioned by the pandemic and prepare for future shocks. It is imperative that we work together as we risk losing recent development gains and seeing millions fall back into poverty. It is time for the region to redirect course and pursue a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable future for all. We are in this together.
But the resilience building agenda is too big for any one stakeholder to address acting alone, and simply bringing together stakeholders, whether at the national, subnational, regional, or global level, is not enough. Effective, focused and sustained coordination among stakeholders is paramount to provide countries with integrated and comprehensive support.
The OAS, as a hemispheric forum and honest broker, must continue to facilitate this process while we work with member states towards the attainment of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda. Cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships that include all actors strengthen us, enabling us to be more than the sum of our parts. We can and we must work together. The future of our region depends on it.
Bueno, la CIM tiene una agenda enorme en el tema de democracia y de liderazgos. El primer ámbito tiene que ver con la gobernanza electoral, para que esta gobernanza electoral responda a las necesidades con las que fue creada, y es buscar los espacios de redistribución del poder. Después hay un programa interamericano sobre el liderazgo de las mujeres, donde generamos conocimiento y también tenemos cursos de capacitación. Hay un poderoso curso que ha llegado a más de 1000 mujeres con más de 15 ediciones, que es para candidatas electorales, en las cuales conversamos con ellas, pero también nos ponemos en una agenda de solidaridad y articulación y alianzas entre las mujeres, a pesar de las múltiples diferencias ideológicas o de partidos políticos. También hablamos de los temas de violencia política, porque no es lo mismo llegar que quedarse, y la violencia política es una forma de ejercicio de disciplinar a las mujeres para que vuelvan al mundo de lo privado y enfrentar la violencia, hacer buenas investigaciones, buenas leyes que permitan sancionar la violencia política. Es parte de las aspiraciones de la CIM en este programa de liderazgo de las mujeres. La aspiración histórica de las mujeres es estar en el mundo del público, que nuestro trabajo sea remunerado y que tenga un reconocimiento. COVID ha puesto en evidencia una profundización de las brechas existentes para el logro de este objetivo. Estas brechas existentes ahora dan cuenta de que podríamos tener un rezago de más de 2 décadas en el mundo laboral, que el cierre de brechas que se previó que podía tardar 100 años en cerrarse, ahora se habla de 135 años para cerrar la brecha entre los hombres y las mujeres. Entonces, nuestro objetivo es que miren el derecho de las mujeres al empoderamiento económico, que el statement "quédate en casa", que es un viejo conocido del patriarcado, no sea que nos quedemos en casa siempre, y que entendamos que la inserción de la mitad de la población, de este talento humano que tiene una serie de ventajas competitivas, es necesario para el crecimiento económico. De manera que la CIM está colocando esta realidad, está colocando las necesidades de las mujeres y está haciendo unas recomendaciones de rutas para poder cumplir con el derecho al empoderamiento económico y con el crecimiento económico que requieren nuestras empobrecidas economías en tiempos de COVID.
Could you please take your seats so that we may begin this meeting of the CD? Good afternoon, Excellencies, colleagues, permanent representatives, alternates, and esteemed panelists. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this third regular meeting of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, CD, for 2025. I am advised by the Secretariat that we have the required quorum and that we may proceed with the business of the day. I submit for the consideration of this Council the draft order of business document CD/OD-155/25, which was distributed by the Secretariat. If there are no objections, the draft order of business is approved. Today's session, Bridging the Gaps in Access and Quality in Education, brings into sharp focus an issue which is fundamental to overcoming the challenge of inequality which continues to beleaguer our region. We often hear the dictum, education is the key to success. Yet millions of children across our region, particularly those from low-income communities, rural areas, and historically marginalized groups, still lack access to quality education. For many students who are enrolled in formal education settings, learning gaps in core subjects and limited access to digital tools continue to feature among the obstacles to reducing inequalities. Across the region, we have pledged to address these challenges. However, while we have made some progress, much more work needs to be done to overcome this daunting reality. Investments in critical areas such as teacher training and continuous professional development, technology, and the necessary infrastructure for improving learning outcomes are urgently needed. Unfortunately, many governments continue to grapple with competing priorities, limited fiscal space, and declining development assistance, which constrains their ability to invest adequately in our education ecosystems, a measure which is essential for expanding access. The digital divide further exacerbates these disparities. To this end, the development of innovative, targeted solutions requires an all-hands-on-deck, multi-sectoral approach to bolster education systems throughout the region. Today's discussion is particularly timely for this Council. As you may know, later this year, CD will convene the next meeting of Ministers of Education, thereby providing an opportunity to ensure that issues such as the aforementioned are prioritized for discussion and action by our Ministers of Education. The meeting will also provide us with a ready platform for expanding regional cooperation on education within the framework of the OAS. To begin our dialogue, I am pleased to introduce a video presentation from the Director General of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, OECS, Dr. Didacus Jules. Dr. Jules's address will provide deep insight into this issue in the Caribbean region.
Distinguished Chair, Excellencies, esteemed colleagues and friends of the OAS. I stand before you not just as Director General of the OECS, but as someone who has spent a lifetime deeply immersed in the work of educational transformation across communities, classrooms, and countries in our region. My journey has taught me one unassailable truth: education is liberation, but only when it is purposeful, inclusive, and of the highest quality. I have been asked to speak to the theme, Education for All, Bridging the Gaps Between Access and Quality. But I reflected with increasing discomfort on this theme, because it implies that the core challenge is one of bridging the gaps. Our fundamental challenge in education at this historical juncture in the Americas is a challenge of transformation and not amelioration. So I'm reframing my focus to Beyond Access, a call for transformative education for all. Today we gather under the banner of Education for All. And this phrase is often loosely thrown around in policy conversations and political speeches. And the term invariably implies the notion of access as if it were the sole criterion for progress. Indeed, across Latin America and the Caribbean, gross enrollment rates in primary education stand at over 95%, UNESCO 2023. Yet raw enrollment figures hide an inconvenient reality: that many students walk into schoolhouses, but walk out without the critical literacy, numeracy, or socio-emotional skills they need to thrive. If we are to be genuinely committed to education for all, we must move beyond complacent rhetoric, beyond celebrating how many seats are occupied in a classroom, and confront the persistent gaps in outcomes and results. I have witnessed firsthand the stark disparities lurking beneath the surface of our education statistics. When we say for all, it must mean every child, including those in the most remote communities, those living with disabilities, and those caught in generational cycles of poverty. When we limit our conversation to school attendance, we gloss over several critical questions, such as, are children truly learning? Is the curriculum culturally relevant and future ready? Do teachers have the resources and the support they need to facilitate real transformation? Too often, the answers to these questions are uncomfortable. In some member states, only 35% of grade 4 students achieve proficiency levels in reading. And that comes from the OAS Educational Assessment Data 2022. Elsewhere, socioeconomic status dictates up to a 40-point gap in standardized math scores, according to the World Bank 2021. These numbers are not mere data points. They are a clarion call for action. Over the years, I've helped shape and implement various reforms aimed at challenging outdated educational models, and these include reimagining the curriculum. At the OAS Commission, we have consistently emphasized a shift from rote memorization to critical thinking, creativity, and problem solving. Our pilot projects in the OAS demonstrated that when primary school curricula focus on project-based and experiential learning, test scores in mathematics and science can rise as much as 15% within 2 years. And that is found in the OAS Innovation in Learning Report 2021. Moreover, these improvements in academic metrics come with a greater student engagement and lower dropout rates, because relevance and cultural resonance motivate learners. Second big lesson is teacher empowerment. We launch continuous professional development and mentorship initiatives, focusing on modern pedagogies and trauma-sensitive teaching. In one OAS member state where 60% of teachers reported lack of in-service training, structured professional development cut teacher attrition by a third. And that too is in the OAS Human Resource Monitoring Report 2020. Beyond technical skills, we have invested in leadership training for principals, encouraging them to become visionary champions of their schools. Where school leadership was actively supported, student achievement in literacy improved by nearly 10% within 18 months. The third area is data-driven accountability. I've long insisted that systemic assessments must measure not only content mastery, but socio-emotional competencies and critical thinking. We need to know what students learn and how they learn it. With robust data, we can pinpoint resource gaps, particularly in rural and underserved communities, and hold ourselves accountable for bridging them. In my work, consistent, transparent reporting has improved resource allocation and in turn enhanced learning outcomes. Fourthly, equity and inclusivity. Among the OAS states, students with special needs often face a dropout rate nearly twice the regional average, and that is contained in the OAS Inclusive Education Brief 2021. Yet when we collaborate with community stakeholders, particularly families and NGOs, to strengthen inclusive education frameworks, we see a marked reduction in dropout rates and an improvement in social integration. This is the essence of education for all, a system where everyone belongs and thrives, irrespective of ability, location, or social background. Let us acknowledge that bridging gaps is not a matter of small adjustments. It requires comprehensive transformation, and that involves holistic policy intervention, because true education equity demands cross-ministerial cooperation. Health, finance, social services, and education must collaborate on integrated policies addressing childhood nutrition, mental health, and early intervention for at-risk students. For instance, in one pilot across the OAS, providing daily meals and counseling services in select schools boosted attendance from 88% to 96% and correlated with a decline in behavioral issues. And that is contained in the OAS Child Wellness Study 2022. Second area is digital infrastructure and the future of learning. The recent pandemic laid bare the digital divide. In several parts of our region, as many as 40% of students lack stable internet access, crippling their ability to continue learning. And that's from a UNICEF report 2020. So education for all in the 21st century must include reliable internet connectivity, appropriate devices, and digital literacy for both teachers and students. A notable example, in an OAS digital learning project, schools that effectively integrated online platforms saw a 12% increase in reading proficiency among students transitioning from primary to secondary school. And that is contained in our Digital Literacy Impact Assessment Report 2022. The third area is investing in teacher professionalism. No policy or technology can succeed without capable educators at the helm. Countries that invest over 4% of their GDP in education see more sustainable improvements, especially when funds are directed towards teacher salaries, training, and classroom resources. Now that is according to the World Bank 2021. If we fail to value and invest in our educators, we will remain stuck in a cycle of underachievement, no matter how many children we manage to enroll. So to transform education for all from a laudable catchphrase to a lived reality, let us demand that outcomes, not just access, define our success. And that involves competency-based frameworks. We must chart our progress in real-world competencies, literacy, numeracy, digital fluency, socio-emotional intelligence, and hold systems accountable. In successful pilot programs, shifting from rote testing to mastery-based assessments significantly improve student engagement. Students are more motivated when they understand that education is about gaining skills rather than passing tests. Then flexible pathways on lifelong learning. The 21st century world of work demands continuous reskilling. If our education systems remain rigid and linear, we leave behind students who do not conform to a single mold. Technical and vocational pathways, digital certifications, and adult learning opportunities must be mainstream. In one OAS territory, integrating vocational training in secondary schools, in other words, making schools more comprehensive, led to a 20% increase in post-secondary employment for graduates. And that is contained in the OAS Youth and Workforce Development Report 2021. This is direct evidence that diverse pathways can yield immediate socioeconomic benefits. Resilience and adaptability. Climate change, pandemics, and economic upheavals are not passing concerns. They are the new normal. Our education systems must be resilient, capable of quickly pivoting to remote instruction, to modular learning, or hybrid models as circumstances demand. And this resiliency requires strategic investments and ongoing training, not just emergency stopgaps. So what do we need to do? Colleagues, let me speak plainly. We know the data, and we have seen the successes and the failures. Education for all cannot remain a hollow promise. There are several things we must do. One, overhaul our priorities. Fund education at levels proportionate to its importance for national development. Redirect resources to the foundational pillars: teacher quality, inclusive infrastructure, and relevant curricula rather than peripheral expenditures. Secondly, collaborate across sectors and borders. No single institution or government can tackle these challenges alone. Let us build stronger alliances, public-private partnerships, civil society and international organizations working together to share knowledge, resources, and best practices. Thirdly, commit to transparency and evidence. We must be honest about our shortcomings, gather data rigorously, and use that data to refine our strategies. Enough with sugarcoating enrollment figures. Let us measure genuine learning and inclusivity. In closing, I urge us all to remember that education for all is not merely about seats in a classroom. It is a clarion call for genuine, deep-seated change. When we invest in quality teaching, culturally relevant curricula, digital readiness, and holistic learning environments, the results are evident. Higher literacy rates, empowered youth, and resilient societies capable of meeting the challenges of the 21st century. Let me say it plainly. We cannot settle for shallow measures of success. Our children deserve more. Our societies demand more. And the future of our hemisphere depends on it. Let us embrace the responsibility we have to transform education for all into a living, breathing reality, where every learner not only enters a classroom, but emerges enriched, empowered, and equipped to build a better world. Thank you, and let us now translate words into collective action.
I thank Dr. Jules for taking the time to address this council and thank him for his contribution as well as that of the OECS Commission to improving education outcomes in the Caribbean. I now invite Mr. Valtencir Mendez, Chief of Education at the UNESCO Regional Office for Coordination with the United Nations in Latin America and the Caribbean. Mr. Mendez, you have the floor.
Good afternoon. Buenas tardes. Ambassador Gideon, thank you, Christ. Thanks for your kind invitation. I will switch now to Spanish. So, buenas tardes. Espero que me escuchen.
I hope you can hear me and see me. It is a pleasure to be with you today. With all of you representatives of your countries at the OAS, along with observers and other participants at this important meeting of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development at the OAS. I'd like, for my part, to underscore the importance of the collaboration that we have launched because Not to forget that all of the member states of the OAS are also member states of UNESCO. The matter that I would like to broach today, as hinted at just now, and that we are invited to consider, is what exactly do we mean by quality education for all? Sounds great, but what does it mean? We think that that is the sine qua non condition for integral development, no more, no less. And we've seen in this very beautiful conceptual framework that has been sent by the OAS a number of figures of the statistics that point this out. And if I may, I would like to underscore a couple of the data that I consider key. 6 out of 10 students in 6th grade do not reach the minimum level of competence in math or in science. And if we look at these, we see that 8 of 10 don't even get to the minimum. This is serious. I hope you get that. And if we look at the countries with even the best indicators, we see that 8 out of 10 students don't understand a simple text in terms of reading. That means that we're talking about students that don't have the means to read and to understand what they're reading. So we can launch into all kinds of techniques for education and so forth, and we see, if we do that, that artificial intelligence is supposed to be accelerating their capacity to understand, but what we're noting is that the direction is in the wrong direction. So, what can we do as educators to make a difference? Because it is, after all, our responsibility, is it not, to give this some thought and see how we can do better within the context of the UN and of all of us. We need to join forces and see how we can derive better benefit from the networks that we have established, but also not only in terms of education, but also in terms of our dialogue that more broadly includes how the ministers of education in the region interact together. The OAS, by the way, has a permanent chair at the table, so it is well and fitting that we discuss these here. But let me, if I may, just very briefly touch on a few of the priorities that the ministers of finance and education focused on when we last met under the aegis of UNESCO. Recommendations in terms of education reactivation or transformation is very necessary in this region. More needs to be done. And in terms of digital transformation, there again, more needs to be done. The interpreter points out that half of each sentence is lost because of the sound. So I'm really doing the best I can, but that's about all I can do. How can we increase the supply of qualified teachers? And by qualified teachers, I mean teachers who know how to teach, if I need to spell that out. And how can we move towards a means by which those teachers are able to retain the interest of their students? We know, of course, that the first years as a teacher are tough. And frankly, many of them drop out. They simply don't care to stick around. It's difficult. And so when we speak of educational transformation, what is it that we mean? And what is it that we need? Well, I would say we need to begin by rethinking what leadership means, what teaching education means. What does it mean to be a good teacher? What does it mean to learn the skills whereby a teacher can retain the interest of his or her students? Well, obviously, that doesn't fall from the sky. We need to work on the basis of some things that aren't easy that quantify. Attitudes, for one. And yet, most specialists, most teachers recognize are key in order to achieve the number of changes that we know we need to move forward. All of this means, basically, that we better keep our ear to the ground. We better be very careful what we are evaluating. It's important to measure. It's important to know how well you're doing or how poorly you're doing, as the case may be, and how that relates to our different educational frameworks. We have a Latin American laboratory or think tank that UNESCO has set up, and which is, in fact, a public good in our region that has existed, believe it or not, for 30 years, 3 decades. For 3 decades, countries of Latin America are collaborating in order to best measure how they're doing in the area of education. We have mostly Spanish speakers. There's also Brazil, and we hope to include Haiti also. The idea here is to, again, increase our capacity so those countries, Brazil and Haiti, can join. Let me particularly reach out to the English-speaking countries of the Caribbean. I mean you. If you're listening to this in English, and English is your mother tongue and you live in the Caribbean, I'm particularly interested in having you join us and work on something together. Let me also say in passing that over the course of this year, 2025, we're hoping to achieve something novel, something different that will, we hope, make a difference and allow us to assess how 200,000 students are doing. This will be with the help of a number of agencies that are well known in what they're doing. But if now we turn to teachers, which is a priority, who are a priority, I should say, and teacher training, we have a 3.2 million deficit in the number of teachers that we should have by 2030. And of those, most of them are in primary school. So it goes without saying that we're going to have to do better and do better fast if we're going to want to attract teachers. Because this is not going to be a simple process. It's going to have a lot of wrinkles, a lot of pitfalls involved. And we're going to have to address a number of factors that are important, like motivation, that appeal also to teachers. So how are we going to recruit the number of teachers that we need? And how are we going to make sure that teacher training is what it should be? Because that is something, I submit, we should all look at together. And that is precisely what we are doing. We have consulted our countries in the region, and we're going to continue to do so, that the task is not closed. And we're going to be working online, too, with ECLAC, CEPAL, as its acronym is in Spanish, so that we can do more together. But the time has come for us to realize that we need to do more, and we need to do it together. We in UNESCO feel that these alliances are the way to go. It isn't a question of everybody trying to do it on their own. And with the help that the OAS can give us, this is an additional framework that I believe might help us all quite effectively. Most of the countries that have achieved a level of development that is commendable most have had good support from the state, from the government. And the basis has to be there, however, to move forward on that basis. That is why UNESCO is inviting you to assist us in coordinating work with your ministries of education so that you can speak through them and through your national committees on education, so we can be sure to know what your priorities are and keep these priorities under the noses of people that are doing up the policy. The OAS certainly is an important participant on that committee, and we will be very pleased to work effectively together, I hope. So, ladies and gentlemen, above all, please stay with us, keep learning with us. I think we can do this, but we will not be able to keep up the numbers that we have here. This is a huge region, and there are a lot of people who have a tremendous level of educational savvy, so that together we can make a difference. Please share that message, which I consider a message of urgency. Share that with your authorities. Please say UNESCO is very interested in having us participate in a collegial effort to work on teaching. We have offices in each one of your countries, and I hope that there we will be able to count on your support. Thank you.
Mendez, for sharing UNESCO's perspective on addressing educational inequalities and on strategies for improving learning outcomes in the region. Our next speaker is Ms. Miriam Prekla-Galguera, Director of Education, Social and Human Development Management at the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, CAF. Ms. Prekla-Galguera, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Excellency. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation in this meeting, in this ordinary meeting of the board. I'm going to switch as well into Spanish. So, en primer lugar,
let me begin again by saying thank you for inviting me to this special meeting of the Inter-American Council for Integral Development, and to greet each one of you, member states. We have been asked to identify what blocks people from acceding to quality education. That's the question. What is stopping people from enjoying quality level education? Do we have a slide that you could pass or have us see here? Thank you very much. I'd like to pick up on what was just mentioned in this first video you have heard. In other words, what are the existing limitations that we face with regard to ensuring that we are offering quality education? There are 5 key elements. One has to do with access and coverage, which is extremely varied in the region. It is by no means a homologue. It changes very greatly from one space to another. Secondly, another block to quality education is that there is a genuine crisis in learning. What does that mean? Well, we're talking about how you measure learning. And by the way, the measurements of the learning, such as it is, are not good. That is why, no surprise, there's a great deal of people leaving school. That happened very much over the time of the pandemic. But as these studies carried out by the group HERCE have indicated, most of the students fail in minimum competencies, both in math and in reading. Fail. The next point has to do with financing. Now, financing must be a priority in each of the countries. Now, while it is true that over time public expenditure on learning has in fact gone up, Overall, it's below 4.5%, and that is way not enough. And every one of the ministries of education will say so. They need not only a system that will assist in improving educational levels, but also ones that will improve the effective manner in which the money made available is indeed been spent. Also, with regard to the labor market, we need to remember that those who drop out of school are going somewhere, and they're going to have to find a job. So they're going to leave school to enter the labor market. Therefore, their ability to be hired is going to depend very greatly on what they have to offer, no surprise. 70% of the economies is informal by nature. So there again, it's important for us to look carefully at the links between the school system and the labor market. What's going to happen to kids that drop out of school who didn't learn much to begin with? What are they going to offer the market? How are they going to best juggle that informality of the market? Here in our next slide, we see also that one of the challenges that is most complex has to do with a great part of our people in this region live in rural areas. And rural areas are, by definition, areas that are underserved. The socioeconomic variables are obviously not going to be a positive factor. And there's a very specific element here that we need to address in order to aim towards anything approaching equality in education. The Inter-American Development Bank for the Caribbean and Latin America includes 23 member states, so that there are membership of the bank who have a voice in the matter. And it is recognized that the main objective here is to promote equitable and pertinent education, equitable and pertinent education, I should say. And this needs to be predicated on the basis of a level of expenditure that is sustainable. So basically, put differently, what we're hoping to do is to encourage countries to move toward sustainable development and growth in their educational sector that will be very cognizant of social development as it relates to these factors. If we move now to the next slide, you will see that the CAF is presently developing its 2030 Strategic Development Program. And there, too, the emphasis is on what constitutes proper investment in education. How much should countries be spending on education? That must be something that is increasingly effective, in other words, that it'll make a difference to the 2030 agenda, and particularly ODS 4, Social Development Objective number 4. There are 3 pillars here. The first has to do with learning, not only in terms of the place where learning takes place, but also as to the actual activity of learning and what that learning is aiming toward. That's the first goal. The second has to do with the educational context in which kids are able to learn. We're not talking about over-personalizing who's better at this and who's better at that. We're talking in the overall. There are issues, capital I, governance, teacher training, elements that make a difference to the quality of the system at the end of the day. There are also elements such as, for instance, security. Let's face it, many of our countries are unsafe. People are scared to go to school for good reason. So that is not a minor issue. Parents and everybody else need to be sure that children that go to school aren't going to be risking their lives. Furthermore, as we said earlier, we need to think of the transition between formal education and moving toward the market. Mobility, the quality of the scholarship, what people eat when they go to school. Are they given anything to eat? What do they take as their lunches? And then there are other equally challenging aspects, such as what we have in the rural milieu. Cities are not the countryside, and so we had better do better, no pun intended, to ensure that in order to have some equality in learning, children or young people that are in an educational milieu won't feel they're risking their lives, and that the systems into themselves are in fact comparable. I want to say two things. We are here and most ready to help you in seeing how best you might improve your educational systems. And please know that we have a vast array of financing mechanisms that will make a difference to your ability to pay for an improvement you may have in mind. That's my first point. Secondly, strengthening alliances matters. And where you're sitting this afternoon is the chance to tighten your ties, to improve your alliances, jointly and severally, as you identify what are the blockages for your children and adolescents to have access to better education. And how can we together remove anything negative and allow you to move forward with success? Thank you very much. I send you greetings, and I hope you have found this of interest.
Ms. Breckler-Galguero, for your insights on investment in education and innovative financing mechanisms to improve access and quality. I now open the floor for an interactive dialogue between member states and our panelists. Delegations are kindly asked to limit their questions or comments to 3 minutes. Okay. Then I recognize Dominica. Thank you. You have the floor, Ambassador.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish to thank the panelists. I think most of the contributions, all of them had a slightly different perspective, but very effective in shedding light on education. My concern, and probably in the form of a question to the panelists, would be, in my experience, I think in most persons' experience, despite all the training programs that government may institute and other educational institutions may attempt, there is a natural quality that creates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 good teachers in our lives. Good teachers. And I understand the concept of transformation, but I'm also concerned that people have to be formed. There must be formation before you can transform something. And therefore, there's a nexus between education training and the personality of a teacher. And the success of children built on the personality of a teacher and the personality of the parents or the home or the community is a gap that I have not been able to see filled. I would just like to ask what kind of programming would take care of formation of teachers in the sense that I've just discussed.
Jamaica, I recognize. Thank you, Dominica. Jamaica, I recognize you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I would like to express appreciation for the presentations that were just carried out and that they were very, very insightful and informative. I don't think we can overemphasize the importance of education to development and just to every aspect of our lives. I think the distinguished ambassador from Dominica raised a very, very important point, and I'd like to also reiterate that concern in terms of the training of teachers and the retention of teachers, given the proximity to bigger countries who are recruiting our teachers and so on. I know that it's a profession that you have to be passionate about, and it's very, very difficult. It's a very difficult task to know who's passionate and who's not. But if there are guidelines that are set in terms of training and so on, a concern is, for example, is technology. More and more we're hearing about e-learning, digitalization, transformation of the educational sector. However, we note that access remains a concern. And I'm just wondering, how can we really focus on that aspect in terms of access, especially to rural communities? I know everything there is a concern for costing and so on, but we keep, going around in a circle in terms of what we really, really need to achieve. We know what needs to be done, but we can't seem to get it to the point where we'll never have a perfect system, but at least a much better system. We find that the capacity is there in terms of the ability, the potential, but it needs to be harnessed, it needs to be developed. And I think that for this period, perhaps we wanted some more think tanks and information sharing, as we have seen in the presentations. I just wanted to throw that in this meeting at this moment, in terms of giving it some serious thought, because a lot of lip service goes on into what needs to be done. But how can we, as an organization, really focus on getting it? A lot is being done, and I commend CD for what is being done, and also member states. But certainly we are not at the point that we'd like to be. I just wanted to share that perspective. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dominica and Jamaica. Brazil and Barbados, I crave your indulgence as I ask our panelists to respond to the question and to the propositions just placed before them. And when that is done, I shall offer you in turn the floor for you to pose your questions. Agreed? Thank you. In that case, Mr. Mendez and Ms. Prekler-Galguera, we'd be happy if you could present on the questions and the propositions which have been laid before you. In turn, please. Thank you. Mr. Mendez.
Thank you very much. So, thank you, Ambassador from Jamaica and Dominica. I think your questions and comments are really key in terms of how we can move the conversation. For example, when we designed this strategic that was for our countries regarding what we need to do in terms of advance the teaching agenda, what countries came to us and said that we should really start looking first how we understand teacher education. And we have very interesting examples, experience in the region. So maybe we need to see how we can advance based on these results. And here we are talking, for example, and not only rely in teaching education online. We need to ensure that teachers have some hours dedicated to the practice. They need to be in a classroom. They need to understand what it means to be a teacher. So number one, how we understand teacher education. Second, professionalization of the teacher career. We have in some of our countries that is not done enough in a let's say in a positive fashion way. We need to respect and give a career path for teachers. So this needs to be one of our top professions in a country. Like we know in some countries that have been very successful in their education systems, they took very serious the teacher career. So this is number two. The third is promotion of working conditions and the teacher well-being. This is very important. In our strategy, we suggest an indicator to measure the teacher well-being, because what we are seeing is that many teachers, after the government, after the states invest so much in teacher education, after the 1 year, 2 years, or at least in the 5 first initial years of their teaching profession, they give up. So we have countries that have 20% of their teachers in the first years abandon their education system. So we need to find ways to measure the well-being and also to improve the condition, the working conditions of those teachers. Then we have cross-cutting themes. That means inclusion, how we really have an inclusive approach to the teaching profession. For example, in some countries, we see a very feminine body, that most of the teachers are only female, and then in the direction of these schools, we have males. So we need to take a look into that as well, in terms of gender equity and the role models for these boys and girls. Second, the teacher voice, we need to add them to the way we build the policies regarding teachers. And then we have some enabling factors, that is financing. As we heard before from the colleague Miriam from CAF, we need to continue investing. And if we look at the amount of dollars we invest for each student in our education systems, is way below the average that we have in other successful countries in education. So improving financing and efficiency in this expenditure. And second, as an enabling factors, monitoring systems. We need to have better data to see how our teachers are doing and supporting them as well in terms of some positive tools that help them to know how they are doing, how they are teaching, and how is the results their teaching is having on their students. And then the last two elements that I would say is the recognition of the teacher and appreciation of our societies. So we need, I think, to foster campaigns in which our countries say teachers to be a teacher is a great profession. And if they are supported, it can be one of the best professions in our country. And finally, the last point is capacity building, capacity reinforcement. We need to give teachers tools in which they can continue learning, for example, with all the digital transformation that many of them need to learn what it means to be a teacher in the 21st century, using these fantastic technologies, but they need training and support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mendez. I now turn the floor over to Ms. Prekla Galguera for her response.
Thank you so much. I haven't heard what Altencir has mentioned because I couldn't hear the audio. I don't know why it didn't work, but I'm going to add my comments on that.
Thank you very much. With regard to the items mentioned by the ambassador from Dominica and the ambassador from Jamaica, it's important to be very clear about two things. First of all, in order to have a good supply of teachers, you don't need to have the best salaries. Of course, there is a direct correlation between the salary percentage and how many people are drawn to the teaching profession. But there is a key point, and that is social recognition of teaching as a profession. And this is something that we need to work on based on various factors. from the Ministry of Education with recognizing a teacher's authority. We also need to work with families in an environment of communications from a standpoint of public policy in order to value and recognize the profession of teaching. Finland is well known as one of the countries with the highest education indexes and school performance, and they don't actually have the highest salary for teachers, but social recognition of teaching as a profession is actually one of the highest in that country. That means that a lot of young people are drawn to teaching. They have a lot of social will. They want to contribute to developing their society. They want to contribute to educating society. That is one side of the equation. That is recognition of teaching as a profession, and it's key. Now, the teachers that are already part of the system and who don't have enough skill to teach and transmit lessons in a way that can be measured in terms of the students' achievements. So here we need to work with different public policy programs. We might work on initial training as well as professional development for teachers. Thanks to assessments of a lot of teacher training in different countries, regionally, we are able to identify the skills that teachers are not able to transfer to their students. In that framework, we're able to work on mentoring and training programs in order to strengthen the skills of our teachers, and there are other programs. For example, what are we doing from the CAF to strengthen teachers' skills? For example, we're developing an AI app, and that will allow us to provide mentoring to teachers in teaching math. For example, we know that the class that is hardest to teach is math. Algebra and geometry are topics where if the teacher doesn't understand it, how are they going to teach it? So we are looking at implementing AI as well as in-person training, depending on where the school is located, for mentorship programs. And this is aimed at strengthening the capacities of teachers in these areas, which we know are areas where they are not successfully transferring knowledge. And finally, of course, there is and there will be weaknesses when it comes to selection. That is, a lot of teachers don't want to go to the most far-flung rural areas. And so we need to look at what they're doing in other countries in order to address that situation. Are there incentive programs? Maybe not just economic incentives. Is there a points scale for professional development for teachers in order to provide incentives for highly qualified teachers to transfer to some of the most vulnerable regions with least resources in order to improve teaching in those areas? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Prekler-Galguero. I now offer the floor to Brazil to pose your question. Brazil, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Brazil is grateful for the presentations from the panelists, which contributed a lot to our discussion debate. And I have highlighted the mechanisms for international cooperation that are available for education. And these are important tools for exchanging best practices, experiences, lessons learned, and public policies in the areas of education, quality and access, and We have taken part in this debate at the OAS on prior occasions. So I would like to ask the panelists if they can please respond about the issue of financing. Cooperation, particularly South-South cooperation in the area of education. I'd like to know, where have you seen the most pertinent examples of this, where there are opportunities that we might be able to leverage in the region? And I think that there are some issues related to graduation in some countries of the region. We have seen investments from multilateral and regional banks in education. I'd like to hear about your perspective on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brazil. Barbados, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the presenters who presented. This topic is a very important topic for me personally because I spent 8 years in the classroom as a teacher. And the reality is that you cannot speak about policies, you cannot speak about initiatives only. Teaching has another side, the human aspect. And that's something that we need to understand. The human aspect is something where it makes the teacher relatable to the student. So yes, finance is important. Yes, infrastructure is important. But if you don't have that individual who is able to speak and relate to the student, that student is not going to take anything. You must go down to the level, and by a level where that rubber meets the road. You must go down to a level and be a level where a student is. If you speak from a high position, we don't get down to the low position. You must be able to be ductile and flexible to ensure that you could reach each student where they are. And through that, you're going to improve the capabilities of students. And through that, you're going to improve the agency of students. If you want to speak about outcomes, one of the key things you have to look at is looking at the soft skills of teachers. In my country, Barbados, since independence, we focus a lot on education. And the reality is that we are at a unique block. A block where we saw and we see the importance of educational transformation to take the country forward. And one of the things that have really come forth is that importance of soft skills. And I just want to reiterate that if you're going to improve the agency of students, if you're going to improve their outcomes, a lot of work has to be put into teachers to make them relatable. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbados. I now offer the floor to our panelists to respond to the questions on South-South cooperation in education and on the softer skills, the human side of teachers and teacher training. Thank you very much. I offer the floor to Ms. Prekla Galguera and then to Mr. Mendez, please.
Thank you so much.
My first comment with regard to the intervention from Barbados is that you have underscored something fundamental, that is the human aspect in education, not only from teachers, but also with regard to the relationship with families and students. And this, of course, is key. All of us remember that teacher that, in one way or another, saw us and saw something special in us. So working on that humanity and coexisting within the educational space is a key element to achieving high-quality education as well as humanity-based education with principles and values that we would like to see reflected in our society. That, of course, is fundamental. It is key. Now, with regard to a South-South cooperation, to respond to Brazil, I'd like to share that this is also fundamental. We need to work on this cooperation, triangular and South-South cooperation, that is. South-South cooperation, and particularly those of us who have been working from the CAF, based on best practices in some countries, we can see the development of public policies, and in other countries, they are seeking those very policies. And so we can be the link between various ambiances within education and look at how to finance that and how to build that into triangular cooperation without having to replicate things from zero. We can look at what worked in one country and how we could possibly transfer that to another. With South-South cooperation, this is the bedrock of bilateral relations between countries of the region. Again, this is key to strengthening our educational systems as well as public policies in general. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Prekler-Galguera. I now offer the floor to Mr. Mendez for his response.
Muito obrigado.
Yes, may I speak in Portuguese? Or is that a problem for the interpretation system?
You may speak in Portuguese. We have Portuguese interpreters. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you very much to Brazil for your question. And I think that the main issues that we have when it comes to how we are able to achieve this South-South cooperation in education would be, for example, first of all, looking at language barriers. This is something that we see in platforms that need to be adapted from one region to another, and it's something where we need to work using that system and how we can ensure that our languages are included. And sometimes we need to strengthen these mechanisms. And this is an ongoing process using existing mechanisms, because sometimes we have initiatives that are created and then we might try and reinvent the wheel rather than simply strengthening what we already have. We need to strengthen regional level projects as well as projects that really contribute to creating public goods at the regional level. Often, we're able to see the contribution of solutions, and we don't necessarily see a serious investment in these public goods or these deliverables in the region. Being able to recognize best practices and perhaps lessons learned from South-South cooperation. And also one example is the challenge that we face in UNESCO, which is financing for higher education titles through a convention, an international convention on recognizing academic achievements and degrees, particularly in higher education, and also looking at countries that are able to see this as an extremely relevant tool to fomenting South-South cooperation so that we can streamline that exchange, travel, and cooperation between the countries. And so my message might be that we can strengthen existing mechanisms in order to truly share our existing experiences and resources.
Question in terms of the importance, no, of the human dimension of our teachers. This is key, and for this reason, when I mentioned about the priorities that we have, and when we talk, when we work, when we create really strong programs for teachers, is key to understand their human dimension, is key to understand their well-being and support teachers. And we all know, and as Miriam was mentioning before, we all remember that teacher that changed our lives. I myself, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for a specific teacher that asked me, what are you going to do? I come from a small village in Brazil, and that I have very little expectations to continue studying. Thanks to a teacher, I am here. So I totally understand what you said. And I think for this reason, is key to support teachers, is key to increase the investment on teachers, because through them, we can really make an impact and we can change our education systems for finally in this region that is so needed to a transformative education. So thank you very much for your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mendez. As there are no further questions, I'd like to thank you, the panelists, for your valuable contributions. We deeply appreciate your insights and look forward to our continued collaboration in implementing policies, strategies, and initiatives which can truly effect change in the education ecosystem in our countries. I now invite member states to share their successful policies, strategies, and programs which have contributed to expanding access to quality education. I urge delegations to kindly limit their remarks to 5 minutes. At this point, I recognize Costa Rica. Costa Rica, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm speaking to President Juan Ruiz. He is the Executive Director of the National Council for Higher Education in private universities in Costa Rica, known as CONASU. And he has a master's in business administration, and he is a PhD in business. And he has been working in the Chamber of Commerce of Costa Rica with 30 years of teaching experience, and we are certain that his experience will be a great contribution to our debates and dialogue today on our joint efforts for high-quality higher education, sustainable development, and ongoing improvements in business administration. Thank you, Juan Carlos, for accepting our invitation, and I ask that he be given the floor. Thank you.
Ambassador, is your guest speaker still connected, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to take this opportunity to apologize. Actually, it's Ricardo Juan Reese, and he should ask for the floor because he is connected.
Por favor de pedir la palabra, señor.
Sir, please request the floor.
Señor Ricardo Won, si es tan amable de solicitar la palabra.
Ambassador, Costa Rica, I'm being told that he was offered the floor, but maybe he's having some issues with connectivity. With your permission, we'll move on to Mexico while your guest organizes himself and hopefully resolves his issues with technology. Thank you. Ambassador,
Gracias,
you have the floor.
gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I appreciate your putting this issue before CD. We think it's absolutely central for the ongoing life and success of individuals and not to mention our countries. I'd like to greet and applaud the presence of Kim Osborne. Very nice to have you with us, and also thank you to all those who have spoken. You appreciate your presentations. In Article 3 of the Political Constitution of the Republic of Mexico, there is stated that each individual has a right to education. Now, that is a premise that is built on our notion of human rights. Mexico considers that education is absolutely essential in order to combat exclusion, discrimination, and to allow a person to proceed in life. In our National Plan 2025-2030, which was published just February 3rd of February last, there is an emphasis put on humanism and of how we see the importance of individuals going forward. The objective is not only to reduce and to eliminate poverty, but to eliminate the roots of poverty. And one of these has to do with not having a sufficiently strong vision of education and social policy. And that is at the crux of the raison d'etre, of the reason for being of our Institute on Public Education, the Ministry of Public Education. We believe in education that is inclusive, that is broad-reaching, and that will always bear in mind the interests of the children, boys, girls, young people who need that education and wish to impart it where the children are. Mexico has carried out an overhaul of its educational system in recent years, adopting the concept of the new Mexican school. This is a concept that is based on and focused on individuals from early childhood to university. It's important to develop in each individual a critical means of thinking, a view of moving forward that sees in the teaching profession the role that will enable each teacher to impart a culture of peace, of what it is to be a good citizen, a good member of society, interculturality, and, by the way, full respect of the environment and nature as a whole. There's also a great deal of emphasis placed on vulnerable populations, on gender equality, and of different ways of operating on the basis of critical thinking. We see education not as something you do 1 through 6, 6 through 12. It's a lifelong approach. And our president, Claudia Sheinbaum, our new president, first female president in Mexico, has put forward a new concept of high school. And through this, we will be creating 200 new places, starting 200,000 with 40,000 initially, which will focus on higher learning in two respects. The general education, BA, if you wish, and the other one focused on technology, different technical areas. And through the National Autonomy on Autonomous National Institute of Technology, the objective will be that between now and 2030, there will be 25% of coverage for the average and higher learning levels. There will also be public questions put as to people's feeling as to what medium and higher learning should entail. And this will be fed into our new model. Mexico considers that part of this strategy will be rooted in social programs to do with welfare, where there will be direct economic support, which are in fact set forth in our Constitution. mainly also the set of scholarships that have the name of one of our premier presidents, Benito Juarez, another Cerrito Cetina, and another that says, "School is ours." This has to do with how we see the space available in school. All the children that attend public schools from preschool to primary school have a scholarship accorded, each one of them. And at the secondary level, there will also be financial support as well as an opening to college so that no one can be left behind because they don't have the money to go forward. If they have the brains and the will, the support is there. Starting last March 12th, a new national strategy that is based on the slogan, "Live Healthy, Live Happy," is going to be launched in all of the primary schools in the country with the attendant specialists who will be imparting what is needed to live a healthy life, free of addictions of all kinds. And by that we mean also what is considered a healthy weight, what one should eat to be healthy, and a general approach to one's health that will improve, it is hoped, the yield of the students, how well they feel at school and how they can progress. Very soon, in a couple of days, 29th of March, we will have for the first time a prohibition on selling junk food and sugar-laden beverages at the schools in our republic. Absolutely forbidden. We will be placing a great deal of emphasis on natural sciences and biological sciences, and priority sectors for development, such as the means by which children and young people can learn digital techniques to achieve a career, if they so choose, in the digitalized world. This will be greatly supported by our Ministry on Science and Technology, which has just been launched. Our educational sector will be studying artificial intelligence for better training of teachers and the development of new forms of learning. The idea is to ensure that that technology is really a plus, that it will enrich the lives of students and not be, in fact, siphoned off to some anti-social purpose. This will be with the support of UNESCO, which we celebrate, and which will help us find artificial intelligence techniques that can be applied to teaching to avoid any negative impact on the development of the talents of our children. Madam Chair, this exchange of experiences and lessons learned, the alliances I've talked about, we consider are going to be invaluable to ensuring that we shore up and broaden the scope of our educational activities. The meeting of the OAS on education will in fact be held in my country, and we're very pleased to be able to host it. And the focus will be on education that will be inclusive, equitable, and based on a prospective roadmap for the region that will reflect the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, particularly objective number 4, which is, as you may remember, education of quality. And thank you for bringing this to our attention and allowing me to speak to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ambassador. I'm now pleased to offer the floor to Mr. Juan Carlos Wong Ruiz, our guest from Costa Rica. Mr. Wong Ruiz, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes. Reciban un caluroso y afectuoso
afternoon to all of you. I greet you very warmly from Costa Rica. I wanted to be as executive as possible so that you could, in an efficient way, from my perspective, get a sense of where we are in Costa Rica on these issues. And as to the question of quality education that the member states could offer in a better way, I would say that instead of being focused on a particular strategy, rather we should be very sure to bring in the academicians and the people who really know about teaching. I think that's a basic premise on which to build. And indeed, for what it's worth, that's what we're doing, putting our money where our mouth is here in Costa Rica. What can be done to reduce the educational gap is a question that's being asked. Well, we have, as some of you have already noted, and Dr. Juice also noted, Mr. Mendes as well, all of you, we talked about, for instance, nutrition and school meals that is offered to some 8,000 students. We also talked about getting rid of the economic and geographic barriers that keep students from doing what they could. About 100,000 students are being affected by a new policy in this regard. At the primary and secondary level, we know how critical scholarships that are offered at the secondary school level will be, because at that point, the students will feel they have a choice. They may wish to go on and further their education. Another program that we have launched is to be very sure that we're not leaving anyone behind, that we are out in areas where perhaps there has not been a sufficient presence on the part of the Costa Rican educational system. We want to offer the first and second cycles of basic education for those who wish to become teachers, and there is where the teacher learns, aside from delving more deeply into their own subjects, as the ambassador for Barbados was mentioning, has a chance to build up his or her own self-esteem. It's very important. Knowledge is all fine and well and essential, I grant you, but so too is self-esteem. And I thought that was a point that was brought forward by the delegate that was very, very germane. People need to believe in themselves in order to go forward. And sooner or later, they'll probably have to work for a living, as most of us do, and won't hopefully wish to aspire to a worthy and a good job. Let me also share a couple of points we consider of interest. First of all, how can we build on teaching centers that aren't overly exclusive? How can we allow for students to pursue their interests in a way that will ensure that there's an ongoing revision of any problems so that exclusion is not an issue, and also how best we can follow the goals of the Ministry of Education. In other words, what is the roadmap that we would have set for ourselves? Where are early warnings able to be spotted so that potential issues with learning can be spotted sooner rather than later? Clearly, there need to be strategic projects to ensure that the right people come into the teaching profession. Community teachers having access to higher learning. I would have loved to tell you a lot more of that, but alas, there is no time. Maybe we can meet again another time if you would be interested in delving more deeply into any one of these initiatives. Next, please. Question: how can technology be used more effectively in order to attend to educational needs so that all member states can see their students move forward? This affects all of the regions, needless to say, and particularly those that have the least invested in digital context. We're talking about structures and systems in the regular sense. There's also the very important question of teacher training. How can the teachers be trained more effectively? And what governance models might be used? This is why I say at the end in the pink notes that Costa Rica is constantly redefining what it needs, how it can best implement an overall view of what proper teaching can be, what innovation and sustainability needs to be from a financial standpoint. That's why we are looking for a management level in teaching that will be part of our policies on an ongoing basis. We don't want this special strategy and this other special strategy for 1 year or 3 years or whatever you want. It isn't a one-off thing, a special thing for a special moment. There needs to be an integration of these basic principles so that it's an ongoing thing. And for the sake of time, I'll leave it at that. If you need any more information, I'd be happy to share it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Costa Rica. I now offer the floor to the Ambassador of El Salvador. Ambassador, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I thank you, and indeed I thank each of the panelists for the information they've shared. El Salvador is positively convinced that education is what we must have in order to allow our children to aspire to sustainable development in our countries. That is why we're working very, very hard to make sure that our education is accessible and of a high quality from day one to the end of their college degrees. We're looking for something that is integral, that is high quality. We want something where children will feel safe, both in the urban areas as well as out in the countryside, so that they can benefit from the planks of our new strategy called La Nueva Escuela, the new school. We want school to be seen to be what it is, that is a motor for change. And for that, access is key. Every student must be able to aspire to learn what he or she needs to move forward in life, to spot particular talents, and to be afforded the opportunities to acquire the skills needed. Our President Bukele has upheld these principles and is in fact offering 15,000 scholarships so that more and more students have an access to higher learning, particularly in the public sector, and in order to encourage young people in El Salvador to see public service as a plus. The only requirement is to make good grades. For the rest, and to do community service. Besides that, the state will provide the necessary. 5,000 students will be joining the system in the next school year, and people will be coming from the most rural areas as well as from the cities. Every one of them will be given the opportunity to move on beyond primary school and secondary school. We're trying to change the way in which we see higher learning. Today in El Salvador, frankly, access to the higher degrees is no longer the privilege of the few, but rather the right of the many. The international education systems in the academic sector are allied now with our national educational systems and our universities, and we hope to be able to count on more and more entities that will wish to work with us. The Key Institute of Engineering and Science is a higher learning institute that has been set up in order to launch STEM studies in the country, particularly in the exact sciences and in engineering. We are offering scholarships to young Salvadorans with very limited resources and focusing on creativity and technology in general. Madam Chair, this is a challenge that urges us to do more with as much as we possibly can. We need to work, we're very convinced, with every one of the institutes and branches of government, certainly with the Ministry of Education, but also with the resources we have here at the OAS. One of the results of this session, I think, can be, and I think this is going to be, shared at the next session of the Inter-American Association on Education. We hope then to be able to exchange best practices through CoProNet so that each one of us has the better opportunity to pick up the challenges that we know we must. We need traditional scholarships. We need that help. We need access to new technologies and hope that we have the necessary support from governments, from member states, and we will be very happy to share statistics in all of these areas. Finally, with international cooperation, we hope very much that we can move forward in offering an entire population quality education, particularly for the poorest among us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, El Salvador. I'm now pleased to offer the floor to Peru.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me begin by thanking everyone for the interesting statements we've heard, and thank you, Chair, for choosing this to be on our agenda today. Let's face it, this is one of the most important goals that this region can tackle. We recognize that education is a universal right. It is a valuable tool to eradicate poverty and to launch sustainable development. But we also realize that this doesn't fall from heaven, and our most vulnerable and forgotten communities need more help. We need to work on social and economic inclusion for many, many people in our population, particularly with people who live out in the middle of nowhere and where it's impossible to get. In Peru, just last week, let me tell you, we launched our academic year, and one professor died on her way to the school where she had been inscribed because she had to walk for 6 hours, and she died of fatigue. How can that be? It is intolerable. So Peru is painfully aware of how much the training of the teachers, but also the assistance to them, particularly in the rural zones and among the indigenous populations, more needs to be done. We need to improve the schools that are there, and we need to build them where they don't exist. Our public policies on national education of quality for all is now considered a sine qua non. It's a key means by which we wish to promote further equality and give kids from vulnerable, poorer sectors a chance to get ahead. Particularly in areas where different indigenous peoples live, we need to be sensitive to cultural differences in teaching. Indeed, teaching should be the means by which children and young people from areas that have been pretty much forgotten have a chance to step up and step out. But for that, we better keep them in school, and that is quite a challenge. In the rural indigenous areas, that is quite a tall order. And it's not an easy answer. There has to be a very complete answer that looks at very different elements, not least the fear of these young people of being abandoned and, frankly, lost in the shuffle. So we need to be sure that the local leaders and that the parents are very much involved.
Pleased to offer the floor to Panama.
Muchas gracias, señora.
Thank you. On behalf of the delegation of Panama, I'd like to thank all of the panelists for their very valuable contributions to this meeting of the Inter-American Council for Sustainable Development and Integral Development. We think this is one of the most important elements for the equitable development of each of our countries, for offering universal access to quality education. Education, as we know, has always been a form of transformation of society and a means to equality. However, alas, the data tells us that we're not where we need to be, particularly in rural areas, in indigenous areas where particular vulnerabilities subsist. Panama knows what it's talking about. We have those same challenges, but we are determined to do better as we move forward. José Raúl Moreno Quintana, our president, has stated that important policies are going to be launched to narrow the spaces, the differences in the levels of education that are being offered. And let me refer, as we have been asked to speak here, we need to ask ourselves, how can we do better for populations that are out in the middle of nowhere and don't have enough attention? We are putting attention on giving children uniforms, on supporting them from a nutritional standpoint, and help them in other respects financially, so that their going to school doesn't mean a financial hardship for their parents. We're also very much focusing on modernization of the school structures out in the rural areas, so that internet is available, so that technical support is offered for people with disabilities. No one must be left behind because they live out in the middle of nowhere and don't have the money. We have to have policies also to narrow the educational gap, and to that end, we are overhauling our university campus so that access to higher learning is also made easier. There will be dorms where people who are coming from remote areas in the country can stay and follow their studies. At the same time, there are new alliances that are being forged between the public and the private sector, so that we don't forget the market, the labor market, and so that people learn about critical thinking and competencies. This is a way to put forward a view of citizenship that is ethical and sustainable. We also want to be sure that people stay in school. We want to have tutors available and psychosocial support where necessary. We understand that too many elements that are linked to violence, to poverty, or to mental health can be of a tremendous impediment, and we have to work against that and help people move ahead. We have an early warning system to precisely note which students are at greater risk of dropping out. We don't want that. We want to help them. And finally, in the pilot school we've launched, we have pretty good results thus far. From a technological standpoint, let me say Panama is also working on a digital and an inclusive change. The help is not only in hardware. It has to do with pedagogical tools and help for students, learning of these different platforms so that they can learn online. The goal is not just to close the gap in terms of access to technology. It is very much to use it as a means of learning and moving forward. Madam Chair, this series of steps we've taken are seen as a fundamental human right, as a public good, and certainly as a sine qua non element of development. We want our people to be productive. We also know that it's going to be a pretty tall order to fill. There is all kinds of different obstacles. There are remote areas. Not everybody reads at the same level, but never mind. We are determined that with the right political will, we can aspire to more just, more resilient, and more transformative educational systems. We support the principles that this Council has also supported. And by the way, we stand ready to share our experiences with any of you, particularly, too, to learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Panama. I now offer the floor to Ecuador.
Ambassador, please, microphone. Thank you very much. I was saying thank you for giving me the floor and greetings to all of the delegations. I would like to thank you on behalf of the Ecuadorian delegation to all the panelists for the very interesting presentations that we heard today. Similarly, I would like to give special thanks to CD and the Secretariat for addressing such an important topic, considering that this year, under Ecuador's chairmanship, we held the 12th Ministerial on Education, as we heard a few delegations already mention. Educational systems around the region face many challenges. According to the IDB, a lack of resources, inequality in access, particularly, and academic backsliding, particularly in science and math, particularly affect girls and vulnerable populations. And we see deepening differences in education as access to technology and opportunities for learning, particularly in low-income communities, rural areas, and remote areas, is lacking. Education in LAC, in terms of parity, is about $2,500, which is about 60% less than the average in the OECD. Now, when it comes to coverage, the same report states that in the region we have achieved universal enrollment in primary education, but there are high differences in secondary and tertiary education, and this continues to be a present problem in the region. On the other hand, we face serious challenges when it comes to educational quality. On average, students in LAC are 3 to 5 years behind the OECD average, depending on the class subject. And expanding equitable access to high-quality education, particularly in forgotten areas, would be a strategic strengthening in ensuring access to high-quality education. And in Ecuador, we have adopted curriculum adaptation to respond to various educational needs and the needs of our population to ensure all students, regardless of their context, the ability to graduate from high school with, for example, curriculum adaptations for persons living in situations of unconcluded education. And so this allows us to work with rural students with flexible schedules without compromising our high standards. We've also been working to ensure context in our educational materials so that everyone is reached with material that's relevant to their reality. And this provides us with a more inclusive, equitable, adapted curriculum for all students. Improving retention rates for vulnerable students is fundamental. Therefore, we need policies to guarantee access, permanence, and graduation. And in Ecuador, we have established inclusive measures that ensure free access for students who are living in vulnerable situations, overcoming barriers that may prevent them from continuing their education. One clear axis of these policies is the implementation of appropriate strategies designed to respond to the specific needs of some of these populations to address the growing educational gap exacerbated by technology, and member states need to implement strategies that ensure access to digital resources with pedagogical approaches that include critical abstract thinking. In Ecuador, we know that the majority of families have at least one mobile device, and that opens the door to ensuring the use of education apps for children and teens as an accessible way to learn. Additionally, we've strengthened initiatives such as the web portal for open educational resources through the Education Ministry. It's also essential that we provide teacher training in innovative ways to ensure digital literacy and pedagogical use of tech without forgetting teaching strategies that promote the development of logical, complex thinking independently of access to technological devices. Thus, we guarantee equitable education that's inclusive, adapted to many different contexts. And to conclude, Chair, I'd like to note that our region can improve our educational quality by providing more resources for this sector and ensuring innovative solutions to provide essential investment in education and expanding access, particularly in the least served regions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ecuador. I am now pleased to offer the floor to Chile.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, dear colleagues. I am delighted to take part in today's session of the CD to discuss this topic that mobilizes us and has been the source of inspiration in promoting major social change. I would like to thank the speakers for their excellent presentations, and thank you to the experts that have been with us as well. Also, thank you to the Executive Secretariat, Kim Osborne, and her team, which took part in preparing today's session. And in light of the statement from Ecuador, dear Ambassador, thank you very much for your leadership, and we wish you most success in the upcoming ministerial process on education that you will be leading, and certainly we will be actively participating in some of that. From Chile's perspective, some challenges and advancements in our educational system we would like to share with you, and that includes initiatives that have allowed us to move forward in ensuring more equitable, inclusive education. In Chile, we have, as well as other countries in the region, addressed historic challenges in terms of inequality in access and educational quality. The gaps particularly impact students in rural areas, indigenous communities, and those living in vulnerable situations. This has driven our wide-ranging reforms, and the pandemic, in some cases, shed light on and amplified these disparities. But it also drove us to redouble our efforts, and one of the tenets of our strategy has been strengthening the skill of our teachers and implementing our curricula in areas such as math for 1st through 6th grade students and other classes for intermediate and high school students. And this has been key in addressing the challenges of digitalization, programming, and AI. These initiatives not only strengthen teachers' practices with support and feedback, but they also incorporate strategies to address the gender gap so that both male and female students are able to learn math and leverage this technology. We've also opted for digital platforms and innovation to ensure access to teaching resources using different devices. Digitalization facilitates the day-to-day work of teachers, but it also contributes to reducing the use of paper, and that ensures sustainable practices in our schools. This flexibility in resources means that we are able to address the many different realities faced by our rural and urban communities. On the other hand, our educational policy has integrated in a cross-cutting fashion work with specific populations. In rural areas, we work to improve access to education and students' retention in areas that have historically been marginalized, strengthening rural education driven through plans such as the Gabriela Mistral Rural Education Plan mean that we are able to shed light on these schools and transform them into models of innovation and educational justice, leveraging the potential, identity, and culture of the area. Our intercultural education means that we have been working to consolidate intercultural bilingual education. We recognize linguistic and cultural diversity in our indigenous populations, and these initiatives stem from the Indigenous Law 19023 and the Intercultural Bilingual Education Plan. It ensures that Indigenous culture is part of our national curriculum, and we are able to strengthen traditional knowledge and identities and active participation from traditional teachers and the link between the school, family, and community have been essential in enriching our educational experience. Similarly, it's necessary to mention the inclusion of students with disabilities, and we have made great strides in integrating these students in our regular education system through programs such as the PA School Integration Program and ensuring accessibility, including Braille and other tools. We have been able to ensure equal opportunity, and we see this in the growing curriculum and drop in school dropout rates among students with disabilities. Finally, regional and international cooperation have been key in transforming our educational system in Chile. Our participation in multilateral spaces, such as this council, allow us to exchange experiences, share best practices, and develop our shared strategies for our teachers, and we share this with the region. We see this from the excellent question made by Brazil on South-South cooperation, and we see essential tools in moving forward in our more equitable education systems that are able to adapt and more inclusive, and we suggest that we continue working on how we can mutually support one another so that students, regardless of their context or origin, are able to access high-quality education and develop their full potential, thereby contributing to the development of our societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chile. I now offer the floor to Guatemala.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of Guatemala, thank you very much for your presentations from the panelists and the reflections, which are very useful to moving forward in ensuring more fair, inclusive education in the region. As we have already heard, particularly from Ms. Breckliff, the LAC region faces a serious learning crisis, and the recent report on the state of education in our region confirms what many of us already know. Too many students do not acquire minimum skills necessary in order to fully develop, and this learning crisis has been aggravated by inequality. Guatemala sees how we have diversified our education in departments such as Totonimipapan. Not even 10% of students graduate from high school. And in Guatemala City, that rate is over 50%, and we see a very clear gap between rural and urban zones, as well as public and private schools. Add to that the structural problem of financing, and public expenditure in education 2023 was just 3.1% of the GDP in our country, one of the lowest in the region. This limited investment has had an impact on school coverage as well as quality, and it gives us a disadvantage in our country. In the face of this, the Guatemalan government has created a new strategic vision for education, and the general policy for 2024-2028 has translated into projects to expanding coverage at every level, particularly in early childhood and intermediate education, and incentivizing people to remain in school, ensuring bilingual, multicultural education. However, we're aware that we have a lot of ground to cover, and we must improve the quality of our education. So we have been driving initiatives aimed at universal learning to ensure that students are able to achieve basic levels of math and reading skills, and this allows us to provide support that is differentiated, including support for teachers at every level. Chair, as Vice Chair of the Working Group on the Intersectoral section of the Inter-American Commission on Education, ensuring access to education not only depends on investing in schools, but also infrastructure, highways, drinking water, electricity, as well as wireless connectivity. Along those lines, healthcare and food security and nutrition are also essential to ensure full participation that's consistent and active on the part of students. We know that chronic malnutrition often leads to setbacks in physical development as well as school success, and that hampers their ability to have a well-paying job as adults. We must ensure that we're able to nourish the bodies and minds of our students and give an important push to our strategic plan to benefit millions of students nationally. We also understand that we need to create economic opportunities and that goes hand in hand with addressing school gaps. We have seen a link between a lack of school and informal work, particularly in marginalized communities. That is why we must look at the labor supply and demand, as well as procedures for fomenting employment, with a focus on flexible programs aimed at practical skills such as languages, digital skills, and other technical skills for life. As part of this, the role of our allies is fundamental. International cooperation, as we already mentioned, as well as collaboration with multilateral bodies and civil society are necessary to ensure we are able to make progress in all of these areas. And from the OAS and Department of Human Resources, we have been working to promote educational schools that open the door to full participation throughout society. These PPPs, experiences, and working with higher education, as well as University El Valle in Guatemala and others, are fundamental to ensure that we have real opportunities in the educational sector. Chair, to conclude, we reiterate our strong commitment to working with the OAS through our participation in the Inter-American Commission on Education and the Inter-American Conference of Ministers of Labor. Education is the foundation of active citizenship and a successful economy, and this is an area where we can work on our strategic vision for international and regional cooperation to guarantee that all children and young people in the region have access to education that allows them to dream and build a future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Guatemala. I'm now pleased to offer the floor to Canada.
Merci, Madame. Thank you, Chair. We would first of all like to thank all of the panelists for their interventions on such an important topic for Canada. Indeed, Canada continues to strongly support the education of young people around the world in order to build a better future for all. Canada has for a long time provided financing and technical assistance in order to contribute to strengthening basic education as well as early childhood, primary, and secondary education with many member states in the region, with a focus on access to as well as quality. Some of the educational programs that we support in the past have included excellence in primary education in Haiti, training for teachers in Guyana, working in Honduras, bilingual education in Peru, access to high-quality education in Colombia in the area affected by conflict, preparation for a working life for secondary students as well.
Of this meeting is to identify factors that limit equitable access to quality education, particularly in the most undeserved areas. Canada wishes to highlight how gender interacts with education access and quality. At the primary level, the region as a whole has achieved high levels of access to education with gender parity. However, completion of secondary education remains a huge challenge, especially for students from lower income backgrounds. Adolescent boys and girls face different challenges in high schools. In many countries in the Americas, boys are at a higher risk of dropping out of secondary education than girls, which is called the reverse gender gap. Adolescent boys have lower rates of enrollment and completion of secondary education than girls. The need to address the high dropout rates of boys in the region using evidence-based approaches is urgent. Teacher training, early warning systems, and financial incentives are examples of activities to promote the retention of boys in education, according to the World Bank. In addition to increased risk of dropout, boys face education underachievement with lower learning outcomes. Girls outperform boys in reading, whereas boys outperform girls in mathematics, but by a much smaller margin. Poverty accentuates learning underachievement for all children and adolescents. Strategies to strengthen the quality of education must take into account the different needs of boys and girls. Across the region, adolescent girls face risk in high school, such as bullying and harassment, gender-based violence, early and unwanted pregnancies, and dropping out of school because of pregnancy and care responsibilities. The need for life skills education, including comprehensive sexuality education adapted to the age of learners, is urgently needed to inform, prepare, and empower children and adolescents so they can engage in healthy, risk-free, and equitable relationships. It is important to address and reduce the gender gap between adolescent boys and girls in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and promote studies in this field among adolescent girls at the secondary level. This will prepare adolescent girls to access post-secondary studies, careers, and jobs in high-growth sectors. Canada continues its support for basic education in the Americas, especially through its contributions to large multilateral funds, such as the Global Partnership for Education and Education Cannot Wait. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Canada. I now offer the floor to St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Chair of the CD, Her Excellency Luan Gilchrist, Permanent Representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to the OAS. Permanent Representatives, Executive Secretary of the Secretariat for Integral Development, alternates, guest speakers, staff at the Secretariat, good afternoon. Like many countries in this hemisphere, St. Vincent and the Grenadines struggles to mitigate the socioeconomic challenges that hinder access to quality education for its citizens. These challenges include limited resources in an ever-shrinking fiscal space, especially in rural communities, gender stereotypes and cultural norms impacting educational opportunities. These disparities are further exacerbated by the digital divide, with students from lower-income households lacking access to the internet and electronic devices. Notwithstanding, St. Vincent and the Grenadines has achieved the UN target of universal primary and secondary education by 2030. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines has adopted an unwavering commitment to improving access to quality education and enhancing educational delivery methods. Its expenditure on education has consistently averaged between 18 to 20% of the national budget, with primary education receiving a significant proportion of the education budget allocation. A comprehensive education sector reform initiative was launched in 2001, and since then, the government has invested over $1 billion Eastern Caribbean dollars through its education policy known as the Education Revolution, which is underpinned with free universal access to primary and secondary education, and on average, 1 university graduate per household in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The government embarked on a school expansion program where it constructed new schools and modernized existing ones. Early childhood education centers fostering early childhood care and development for all preschoolers ages 3 to 5 years are available throughout the archipelago. Every child of secondary age, which is age 11 plus years, is guaranteed a place in a secondary school through an assessment known as the Caribbean Primary Exit Assessment, the CPEA. By September 2005, St. Vincent and the Grenadines achieved universal access to primary and secondary education. At the post-secondary and tertiary levels, the government established an integrated community college framework, merging the School of Nursing, the A-Level College, the Technical College, and the Teachers Training College. Vincentian nationals have access to tertiary education via bursaries, grants, and loans from the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the Republic of Cuba, Mexico, the Republic of China and Taiwan, the Organization of American States, the United States, Canada, and the European Union, among others. There is also a national student loan program, including for economically disadvantaged students, and the national awards are accorded as incentives for teachers and students who achieve certain benchmarks for success. To boost overall learning capacity and to reduce ill health, there is a school feeding program nationwide that provides subsidized healthy meals to vulnerable students and children at risk of malnutrition at the preschool and primary levels. Additionally, continuous education for adults is provided through technical vocational education and training initiatives, learning resource centers, and national information and computer training programs. Moreover, key stakeholders are also engaged in teacher training workshops aimed at improving pedagogical skills and competencies. Chair, the government encouraged the use of digital technology to enhance the learning experience nationwide. All secondary schools are equipped with computer centers, and every educational institution has 24-hour access to broadband wireless internet. Over 15,000 netbooks have been distributed to students at the primary level through the One Laptop Per Child initiative. Chair, the COVID-19 pandemic and the last severe volcanic eruptions in 2021 emphasized the urgency of technology integration in the education system, having disrupted the education landscape with schools closures, halting educational activities, and the displacement of students and educators. These events exacerbated existing challenges, but created the opportunity for innovative solutions to ensure continuity in the education system. Right away, there was a thrust to further embrace technology in the education sector. These events, Chair, have demonstrated that technology can help overcome barriers, paving the way for remote learning and promoting resilience in the education sector. My delegation applauds the OAS for providing the opportunity for hemispheric cooperation to reduce inequality in education and promoting quality and inclusive education. We also wish to recognize the work of the OECS Commission for its efforts to strengthen the teaching profession, promoting quality and inclusive education in the Eastern Caribbean. Chair, systematically addressing challenges to the attainment of universal access to primary and secondary education will improve the achievement of a country's national educational targets. It is also instructive to note that while universal access to quality education is identified as a major thrust for social and economic development in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, so too is universal completion of quality education. Our National Economic and Social Development Plan 2013 to 2025 envisages improving the quality of life of all Vincentians and transforming them into productive citizens. Chair, education is a shared commitment and a partnership between the government and private institutions. It requires investment. It is liberating. It is empowering. It is the key to achieving all the other sustainable development goals. My delegation reaffirms our country's commitment to the imperative of not leaving any child behind and looks forward to collaborating with our fellow member states to bridge the gap in access and quality education for all learners. Thank you.
Thank you, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I'm now pleased to offer the floor to the Bahamas.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Chair, permanent representatives, and colleagues. I join those thanking you, Chair, for convening today's council meeting on the critical topic of bridging gaps in access and quality in education. And I also join those thanking our expert panelists from UNESCO and CAF for the valuable insights that have been provided. Our dialogue today on strengthening access and quality in education is important because we know that education is a long-term investment in the most valuable resource any of our countries has, our people. We also know that ensuring accessible and quality education for all means leveraging the limited fiscal spaces available to our governments through evidence-based interventions and external partnerships, ensuring our curriculum and teachers are fit for purpose to prepare students with the soft and hard skills required for the evolving world of work, and accounting for socioeconomic and special needs challenges that can hinder engagement of students. For the Bahamas, we face the additional challenge of ensuring the provision of accessible and quality education to students across numerous islands across our archipelago. These educational challenges were recently compounded in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, where significant learning loss took place as a result of the pervasive social isolation and dependency on remote learning that characterized that period within all of our countries. A national screening exercise reveals that 44% of Bahamian students required intervention as a result of learning loss incurred during the pandemic. And the Ministry of Education of the Bahamas responded by providing additional support at the lower primary school levels to bolster literacy and numeracy instruction, and providing academic coaches that were secured to support teachers at all levels with efforts they were undertaking to bridge educational gaps. Another area where critical interventions are needed to bridge education gaps is special education. The Bahamas is supporting the training of teachers to pursue advanced degrees in exceptional student education, and the Bahamas has recently implemented a tiered approach to screening of students with prospective special needs to strengthen the efficiency, effectiveness, and suitability of our efforts to support students with special needs. Taking into account the socioeconomic factors that often hinder academic attendance and performance, the Bahamas has also recently launched a national breakfast program to improve student well-being and academic performance. The program initially provided breakfast 3 days a week in 2023, with daily service for schools with 40 students or fewer, and has since expanded significantly, now reaching 91 public schools nationwide, including all primary schools, serving more than 11,000 students, and with more than 500,000 free meals served over the past 2 years. Schools with breakfast saw attendance rise by 3.3 percentage points in the capital, New Providence, and 4.5 percentage points in our other family islands during the 2023-2024 school year, compared with the prior year, on days that breakfast was served. Finally, Chair, in recognition of the reality that higher education is not suitable for all, and that the provision of practical skills can help bridge the employment and employability gap for many students, the Bahamas has developed a polytechnic high school in the capital where students who have demonstrated an aptitude for technical and vocational studies can receive more targeted technical training while also continuing to pursue mainstream academic study. The government of the Bahamas has also introduced a national apprenticeship program and has introduced cadet programs in vocational areas such as meteorology, the agricultural and marine space, and the maritime industry space, respectively, to further expand opportunities for young Bahamians to transition to the world of work. Tuition is also now free for students meeting basic requirements who are looking to attend either the National University or the National Technical and Vocational College. As I close, Chair, I wish to underscore that while the Ministry of Education of the Bahamas has a series of initiatives to demonstrate commitment to the national credo that every child counts and none must be left behind, we are also acutely aware that educating a nation is always a work in progress. And the Bahamas therefore reiterates its openness to learning from and exchanging knowledge and capacity building opportunities with the OAS, member and observer states, and the expert institutions engaging with us today, UNESCO and CAF, on areas such as best practices regarding absenteeism and truancy policy, the development of ethics around engaging with AI and digital literacy policy, the development of institutional support and policy on educational leadership and professional development, building capacity for research to inform educational policy, and lastly, the development of policy for managing inclusion of students with behavioral issues and for meeting the caregiving needs of older special needs students while they are in school. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you to the delegate of the Bahamas. I now offer the floor to Paraguay.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair. The delegation of Paraguay is very pleased that we are dealing with this issue, Education for All, at this council meeting for integral development. It's a key matter, as we know, since equitable access to proper quality education is a sine qua non for everyone. Certainly in my country, we consider it so. Paraguay is very ambitious, as a matter of fact, in what it plans to do, overhauling its educational system from kindergarten to the university. We know that when reading is poor, science and math isn't great, there are deficiencies at the school level. There's more to be done to help kids eat better at school, and a long list of other things that, alas, describe us today. We're going to work on it. And we think then that particular attention on reading is going to be key. We get that at all levels. There's a law on it at this point, and it looks particularly for improving the publication of books in the two official languages as well as in other original languages, native languages. We also are working with the initiative Escuelas Abiertas, Open Schools, to make sure that the comprehensive education of these children covers more than just math and books and reading. More than 1,500 students have been helped, including students from indigenous communities and the back of beyond in 17 departments of the country. Through our program that focuses on first childhood, we have also offered 33,000 boys and girls up to 5 years of age so that they have a chance to improve quickly. There have been great strides also in the distribution of school material, books, pencils, paper, etc., and we distribute these before school starts every year. We understand how critical it is to overhaul our educational system, and that's why we think that the hand-in-hand work of the Ministry of Education and public schools work more closely together and overhaul the present system through the reparations of the schools and special attention services throughout the countries. One of the most important aspects of the national program is improving food supply in the schools. We don't want our children going hungry, and we'd like to be sure that 100% of the student population up to 9th grade are covered and can be fed at school. All of that said, there continue to be a very long list of challenges for Paraguay, and we know that the progress we have made, while it is heartening, still means that we have a way to go before we're ensured that every person has access to comprehensive and permanent education. The international support from the OAS, particularly the Executive Secretariat for Regional Development, and as well as the educational efforts in this regard have made a big difference. Thank you.
I'm pleased to offer the floor to the Dominican Republic.
Thank you, Chair. Our delegation is very pleased with this meeting, this regular meeting, and we are also very interested in hearing what has been shared. Sustainable development, reduction of poverty, and the promotion of more just societies are key. But despite bending over backwards, we know that hundreds of thousands of children in the region go hungry and still need much assistance. We hope that our joint efforts can make a difference. particularly as we consider the elements of this debate and can work on elements that are being implemented for us in the Dominican Republic. First of all, with regard to access in rural and remote communities, we want to do more in terms of the actual schools, buildings, presence of teachers, and educational initiatives, public-private efforts, and more public support might make a big difference in terms of launching innovative systems that will be well received. The Ministry of Education presented back in February of this year a program by which all students can attain a full and productive life through the education they will reach. This is the plan at any rate, and it has to do with preparing people for the pre-university level and making certain that there are inclusive systems and centers so that teachers are better trained, and so too the availability of books. This plan also includes transport to school so that throughout the country, particularly in rural areas, kids can get to school. In October of 2024, the Ministry of Education, together with UNICEF and the Institution on Education, decided on a program of inclusive support so that 100 educational centers can be transformed between 24 and 27, so that 50,000 students with and without disabilities can be helped. That's the first goal. Secondly, we want to reduce the gap that has created inequities in access to quality education. We want students to get scholarships when they don't have the money to cover everything. And the implementation of inclusive educational systems have proven to be very useful elsewhere in the region. So we would like to be sure that the Dominican Republic can benefit from them. We also want to give more time for instruction and less for extracurricular activities, making sure that fewer kids leave school. The program Educación Sin Barreras, Education Without Barriers, focuses on kids that are 15 years plus so that they can continue their learning if they wish. We also want to keep kids in school, particularly in vulnerable areas. This means we need to tackle socioeconomic elements that will serve to avoid school dropping out and flexibility in terms of the different modalities of teaching offered. That can make a difference between people staying in school and not, and how successful they are in the process. We want to offer economic support to families that are poor and help the kids stay in school. We have also implemented programs to empower different people at the personal level, preparing them for a job and improving their quality of life. There is also the question of technology in order to improve education. This is key, but it won't happen without connectivity, and it won't happen either without better instruction for the instructors on all of these new digital techniques. We hope to launch a program that will allow both the teachers and the students to learn online and to feel more comfortable with artificial intelligence and interactive working. Finally, Madam Chair, perhaps the best we can offer our next generations is to ensure that we here at the OAS can truly work so that every child and every adult has a chance to launch their life with a good education behind them. Thank you.
The Dominican Republic. Before I offer the floor to Bolivia, please allow me to request delegates to remain in the meeting because we do have items which require quorum for approval and discussion. Thank you very much. I know it's late, but we'll offer you tea at some future date. That's a promise. St. Vincent and the Grenadines will actually offer you coffee and hot chocolate at a later date. Thank you. Bolivia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Chair. Distinguished friends, representatives, panelists, participants, all, the delegation of the plurinational state of Bolivia is very pleased to greet you, Representative St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we're very pleased that you have called this meeting to focus on a matter that is of such urgency as being able to guarantee equitable and quality education throughout the region. It doesn't get more important than that. Madam Chair, since we launched the Constitution of our state in 2019, Bolivia recognized that education is a fundamental right, and it is a supreme duty of the state to provide. Education is of first responsibility for the state. This is actually set forth in our Constitution, and it must be offered on a compulsory basis and completely free, both primary and secondary. It also states that this education must be rooted in the interculturality of our people, the plurilinguistic nature of our people, and in a flexible approach to intergenerational and gender-wise. We also seek to ensure that educational system will not only allow people to fulfill their potential, but will also bind people as a people in my country, with particular attention being paid, of course, to most vulnerable people, particularly those who are ill, who are discapacitated, or who are not free. This offers not just a transformational vision of what our educational system can be, but also, we think, offers a bedrock for policies that can offer quality education for all. In Bolivia, trust me, there is a plethora of challenges, but so too is our determination to meet those challenges. There are gaps that must be covered, particularly in rural areas where there is a great many of indigenous people and with their own cultures. So the intercultural approach and access to the educational system matters. So too the promotion of appropriate technology, especially in areas that are very difficult to get to because they're out in the middle of nowhere. Juancito Pinto, 2.4 million students. That was a school where measures were taken to try to keep kids at school. In addition, through different pedagogical attention in hospital areas, we are offering education to more than 8,000 students who are in a vulnerable situation, particularly those suffering from chronic disease or long-standing or permanent medical attention. We have indicators that allow us to follow very rigorously how the progress of the students is faring and who comes and who leaves. This gives us then a very clear idea of how our policies are actually being implemented. In terms of the educational quality, we are using a socio-community approach. This is new in the region and unique, I might add, and it focuses a very great deal on the cultural input. It also recognizes interculturality and diversity, as well as ancestral traditions that must be learned and respected. Madam Chair, we think that the reason for this meeting is not just technical. It offers us an opportunity to address matters that are of a profoundly ethical nature, particularly when we're talking about areas that are almost forgotten in our region, and that for historic reasons need more attention. We hope that we can, each of us singly and severally, adopt educational policies that will make the difference and allow young people to overcome barriers that are sometimes invisible but very real nonetheless. We also need to be closing a yawning gap between indigenous or boys and girls who are in vulnerable situations. Bolivia here then would like to reiterate its support for regional integration. We believe in political and technical dialogue in order to strengthen our diversities, share our positive experiences, and make sure that education can be more just, more fair, and won't leave anyone behind. One that is where it didn't used to be and intends to stay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bolivia. I now offer the floor to St. Kitts and Nevis.
Thank you, Chair, Secretariat, distinguished panelists, excellencies, esteemed colleagues. Good evening to all. The presumption is that since I'm the last speaker, I have the liberty of speaking for as long as I want. However, I will not invoke that just invented rule, and I will try my best to stick within the prescribed time limits. With regard to education, St. Kitts and Nevis began to make serious strides as far back as 1968. In that year, 3 important initiatives were introduced in order to usher in universal education. 1, the government abolished the gender-separated system that comprised a girls' high school and a grammar school for boys. 2, that system was replaced by an integrated, comprehensive high school system. 3, the entire school system, from kindergarten to sixth form, primary and secondary levels, was made free for all and remains so today. In addition to this, it became illegal for a child of school age to be kept out of school under normal circumstances, and parents and or guardians could be prosecuted for such an infraction. It was also recognized that good health is essential for effective learning, so a program of in-school vaccination was implemented. Then, in the 1970s, the Free Teachers Training College was opened in order to improve the quality of instruction available to the children. As an aside, I must say that I'm a proud product of that Teachers Training College, that highly acclaimed institution. Later in that year, later in the early 1980s, the free school meals program was introduced at the primary school level. In the late 1990s, the school bus system was introduced, and this was followed in the year 2010 or thereabout with the one-to-one laptop program, whereby every student was given a free laptop, thereby causing the students to cross that digital divide with regard to their education. This came with the introduction of Wi-Fi access in all schools, as well as free access to in community centers. This allowed students to be able to go online even if internet access was not available in the house. The latest advancement in increasing access to education came late in 2023, when tertiary education was also made free of cost by the removal of the tuition charges at the Clarence Fitzroy Bryant College. This institution incorporates the former Teachers College, Technical College, Nursing School, and the Sixth Form program. The late Mr. Bryant, after whom this institution was named, was the Minister of Education when the comprehensive project was embarked upon in 1968. To his credit, St. Kitts and Nevis enjoys a literacy rate of over 98%. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, St. Kitts Nevis. You actually have 1 minute and 23 seconds left. You may not. Respectfully. As there are no further comments, I propose that CD express its gratitude to our invited experts for their contributions, and that the Secretariat compile a summary of cooperation opportunities as presented today, making them available via the CooperaNet platform. If there are no objections, it is so decided. We now turn to sectoral ministerial processes within CD. Today we will consider the draft 2025-2027 work plan of the Inter-American Conference of Ministers of Labor, document CD CIMT/RPA/Doc 57/25 Rev 1. This document outlines key actions to be undertaken by the Executive Secretariat in collaboration with Member States to implement the priorities and mandates adopted by Ministers of Labor during the last IACML conference held in October 2024 in Bogota, Colombia. The draft 2025-2027 work plan was finalized at the planning meeting of authorities of the IACML held in January 2025. Following its adoption at the planning meeting, the Committee on Partnership for Development Policies, CPDP, reviewed the document and is now submitting it for the consideration and approval of the Council. To present the work plan, I now ask the delegate of Colombia, the representative of the chair of the Inter-American Conference of Ministers of Labor, the Honorable Minister of Labor of Colombia, Mr. Antonio Sanguino. As the new chair of the IACML, Minister Sanguino will play a key role in promoting cooperation among our countries on labor and employment issues over the next 3 years. Colombia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I apologize. Unfortunately, the minister who had been connected earlier during this session was not able to stay connected. So I will give a brief recap of his intervention, highlighting the tasks that we hope to highlight with the working group. And I'd like to take this opportunity to reiterate my country's commitment and that of Minister Sanguino to continue working with the ministerial labor process for the Inter-American Conference that was held in Bogota last year and the Bogota Declaration Plan of Action. So we are placing for consideration of the CD, the Plan of Action and the Work Plan 2025-2027, which has my strong support and activities aimed at addressing structural challenges for employment in the Americas. We invite the Council to adopt the working plan and translate that into activities, a declaration, and the Bogota Plan of Action. Specifically, the working plan will allow us to work through the Inter-American Network for Labor Administration to ensure cooperation between the Ministries of Labor and hold hemispheric level workshops for 2025 to 2027 on cross-cutting issues for the region, including AI and digital platforms, from the approach of fundamental rights in labor to be held in Colombia in September this year, fair transition, green and blue jobs, and contributions from the working world to environmentally sustainable economies and societies to be held in the Bahamas in February 2026. Strengthening institutionalized social dialogue to ensure more equitable, fair, inclusive, and resilient societies to be held in Paraguay in May 2026. And finally, a workshop on lifelong learning, work training, development, skills building, and IT systems, as well as the labor market and employment services to be held in Panama in August 2026. Finally, my delegation believes that with these workshops as part of the working plan, we will be able to reach regional consensus to address inequality in our societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colombia, for presenting on behalf of your minister. And the CD asks you to please convey our apologies to the Honorable Minister, as we could not have him on this afternoon. He was waiting, then he had to leave, and then he came back. It was all very dicey. So please express our apologies to the Minister and thank him for chairing the ICML, and we wish him great success in his tenure. I now open the floor to member states who would like to refer to this item. I see no requests for the floor. Therefore, if there are no objections, I propose that the work plan be approved as presented. It is so approved. The next item on our agenda is the consideration of the draft CD Work Plan 2025, document CD/doc 441/25 Rev 2. As you may recall, the draft work plan was presented at the last two meetings of this council on January 28th and February 25th. During those sessions, delegations provided feedback with a view to refining the document before its finalization and approval. Since our last meeting, the Secretariat has incorporated all inputs submitted by member states and circulated a revised version. I submit the revised version for the approval of member states and open the floor to member states who may wish to refer to this item. I see no requests for the floor. If there are no objections, I propose that the Council approve the revised CD Work Plan for 2025 as presented. There being no objections, the work plan is approved. The next item on our agenda is the consideration of the draft work plan for the implementation of the General Assembly Resolution on Strengthening CD, document CD/doc 425/24 Rev 2. As you may recall, the preliminary draft of this document was prepared and presented to CD by the Secretariat last year. Following its presentation, CD instructed the Committee on Partnership for Development Policies to review the document and submit it for further consideration. In response, the committee established an informal mechanism led by Mexico to review the document. A revised version of the document was approved by the Committee on Partnerships for Development Policies and is now being submitted to this Council for its consideration. I take this opportunity to thank Mexico for its leadership in coordinating this process and thank all participating delegations for their contribution. I offer the floor to the Chair of the Committee on Policies, Sebastián Fonseca, to present the work plan.
Muchas gracias, señor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. I'm delighted to present the draft working plan for implementation of the resolution from the GA on strengthening SETI. As Chair of the Commission on Solidarity Policies for Development, and before presenting that document, I'd like to give special thanks to the Minister, alternate representative of Mexico, for her leadership at the helm of this consultation mechanism for strengthening CD, which was established in the Commission. Thanks to the skill of Minister Socorro Jorge, we were able to conclude the working plan before the deadline. This greatly facilitated our efforts. Also, thank you to the 3 member states that were part of that mechanism: Argentina, Bahamas, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, El Salvador, United States, Guatemala, Jamaica, Mexico, Peru, the DR, and St. Kitts and Nevis. The document was drafted over 7 meetings, 1 in person and 6 virtual, the last of which was in February last. The Rev 2 version that's being considered by the Council includes special spaces for implementation as well as the identification of the responsible stakeholders for each of these measures. At the request of member states, the Technical Secretariat included the costs estimated for each measure. In general, the work was presented and improved with understandable language, and we were able to reorganize our proposals for strengthening coherence between the document and preserving its substantial content. I believe that this document is a valuable and strategic tool for renewing CD. And once again, thank you for your collaboration to all of the member states that took part in the process, as well as to the Technical Secretariat for its support. I hope that we can continue to benefit from CD's support with this document as we institutionally and operationally strengthen the Council, and this is pursuant to the mandate from the GA. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Sebastián of Ecuador. The floor is now open to delegations for comments. I see no requests for the floor. If there are no objections, I propose that the Council approve the draft work plan for the implementation of the General Assembly resolution on strengthening CD as presented by the Secretariat. With no objections, the work plan on strengthening CD is approved. Approved. We have now concluded all items on our order of business. I take this opportunity to inform delegations that for the month of April, in addition to its previously scheduled meeting, CD will hold an additional meeting on April 22nd to commemorate Earth Day. This meeting will be held in coordination with the Inter-American Committee on Sustainable Development, SIDS, as part of the implementation of the Inter-American Climate Action Plan and the Declaration of Nassau. A concept note for the meeting will be circulated in the ensuing weeks. I thank all delegations for their kind attention to this matter. Before closing, I would like to remind delegations that negotiations of the CD Omnibus Resolution and other development-related resolutions for the upcoming General Assembly will take place within the Committee on Partnership for Development Policies, COP, over the next 2 months. Delegations interested in proposing text for the Omnibus Resolution or standalone resolutions on development should kindly send their contributions to the Secretariat as soon as possible or upload them to the virtual platform on the CooperNet platform. Pardon me. Upload them to the virtual forum on the CooperNet platform, which has been established for this purpose. Thank you. Before I adjourn, I open the floor for any additional matters which delegations may wish to raise. I see no requests for the floor. If there are no further matters, I thank you all for your participation in today's meeting and look forward to our next CD meeting in observance of Earth Day on April 22nd. And before I adjourn this meeting, I repeat the promise of the delegation of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to offer you the best coffee in this hemisphere and the best hot chocolate that you'll ever have. That will be on April 22nd. Cervezas? No, no tenemos cervezas.
No, we do not have any beer.
Meeting is adjourned.